Okay, how's it going, guys? So, a few people asked me for a sort of long-term review. Hello, Mr. Cows. They find me fascinating, so you're going to hear cows. Of my Fantic Caballero 500 rally, because I've had it for a few months now, and we've just done the first big service, and we're now over 1,000 miles. So it's obviously not really a long-term review, but I certainly feel like I know it quite well, and there's a few things I've noticed that aren't perfect, a few things that I would say are not brilliant on it and could be improved, and just generally I just thought I'd give you a review and my thoughts on it after having it for as long as I have. So just so you know, my use, I live in, shut up cows, I live in Cornwall, and I mess around on the on little trails, a little bit of green laning, and a little bit of just general kind of tootling around. Not doing any huge, big, long journeys on it. I'm not massively experienced. I'm not like a really good, long-term motorbike user. I've only had my full license about a year, so that's kind of where I'm coming from. But yeah, I've been taking it on the little trails, parts of the Trans-Euro Trail, the TET, and I find it completely capable. I'm, like I said, I'm not a massively experienced rider. If you're really going up hard, difficult terrain, then maybe this isn't for you. But for me, I can stand up on it and get around quite comfortably and have no issues at all. And yeah, the bike I had before was a 250 CRF Honda L, and that was my sort of introduction into trails biking, and I just wanted a bit more grunt, so this is why I went for one of these. I partially got it for the weight, I partially got it for the size, because this thing can go straight into my into the back of my van, which I find super useful. All you have to do is fold the mirrors down and it just rolls straight in, no problem, no faffing around. And I wanted something that was a little bit off-road capable, but at the same time also wanted something that was fun and attractive and a bit more grunt than what my Honda had. So let's go into a few things that I don't think this is good for and I don't like about it. So first of all, I think it's a little bit basic, but that can be good in some ways, because I guess there's less to go wrong, but it doesn't feel particularly refined. I think the design of it is, really quite attractive. It basically looks like a budget Ducati Desert Sled. If you compare the proportions and everything, it's very, very similar to the Ducati Desert Sled. That's obviously a bigger, much more refined, expensive bike. But this does kind of like fit into that category. Certainly looks-wise, I get tons of people asking me about it. Like wherever, pretty much 50% of the time, if I park it anywhere, I will get somebody saying, "Hey, what is that bike? I've never seen one of those before. It looks really cool. It's kind of retro. It's kind of this." Like it gets loads of attention purely on the looks of it, which is quite nice. And I certainly like the look of it. I think it's a well-balanced bike. But yeah, we're getting into the things that I don't like. So yeah, I do think the engine is quite unrefined. It's a little bit clackety. It's not sort of smooth sounding. The exhausts sound lovely, but I do find the engine to be a little bit crude. The wing mirrors are very cheap. Actually, I've already snapped this one off here and I super glued it back together. But that's just a little thing. A lot of people complain about the switch gear on the Scrambler and the Rally, but this is the 2021 model and the Euro 5-star one. And basically they've changed it all up. So I never experienced the previous one, but this one is very, very standard. It is literally just exactly like my Honda pretty much. So no problems with the switch gear whatsoever personally. I would say I don't think the electrics are particularly waterproof. I have had quite a few times when I've washed it or it's just been under a heavy rain, and I've had engine warning lights coming on, and I've had the high beam light coming on when the high beam isn't on. So I think that the electrics are probably not that waterproof, because I always seem to get a few issues when it gets very wet. About half the time I put it away, I put it in the van, I put it in the garage. Half the time I leave it on the drive. But yeah, if it gets very wet, not to say that anything goes wrong, the bike still runs and everything, you know, still functions, the lights still function as they should, but you just get a bunch of random warning lights coming on which don't seem to relate to anything that's actually going on with the bike. I've told the guys that sold it to me about that, and they just didn't really have too much to say about it, to be honest with you. But anyway, so yeah, that's something I would say. It's definitely not a bike for the long haul. I think the longest journey I've done on it is probably about an hour and a half in one big long run, you know, up the motorway. And that was starting to get a bit uncomfortable. And then on the way back, you know, it ended up being like a sort of 3 hour, 4 hour ride altogether. On the way back, I did find the seat quite uncomfortable. Obviously, there's no wind protection, but so you're getting buffeted like hell as soon as you go over sort of 70. It's definitely not a bike for the long haul. No doubt about that. It's not super comfortable. You could obviously get some kind of a screen and add a bit of wind protection. It feels fairly planted at speed, like, you know, sort of 80 miles an hour. It seems absolutely fine, and I don't have any issue with the knobblies on the motorway. They don't seem particularly noisy, but it's definitely not a bike for that. The seating position is very comfortable. You know, you kind of like fairly bolt upright. Maybe your legs are a little bit cramped, slightly more bent than you'd want ideally for long distance, because they're obviously trying to get a bit of ground clearance there, because this is the rally version, so your feet are a little bit higher than they would be on a, you know, typical kind of naked street bike. But either way, definitely not a bike for long distance. I personally find I get quite uncomfortable, mainly from the wind. So yeah, the lack of protection from wind on the front there. You do notice that if you're doing anything over like an hour on fast roads, you start to wish, oh, you know, my head's getting fed up with being rocketed around and bounced around, buffeted about. What other things? So I think reliability wise, in those paltry 1,000 miles that I've done, it started every time. Never had an issue. It did quit out on me a couple of times. It just stalled, and it wasn't me stalling it. The engine just switched off, and I got an engine warning light popping up on the dashboard. But then it immediately started back up, and it was fine. I spoke to the guys at the Thor dealership where I got this from, and they just said it's probably just sorting itself out, and, you know, as you're running it in, the engine management system is trying to understand what's what, and it might have just been a couple little niggles, you know, along those lines. So I don't feel like there's any issues with reliability, but yeah, there's been a couple of things that have made me think, not 100% certain. What things have I noticed that possibly will rust quite quickly? I think the discs are already showing a tiny bit of sign of a rust, only very, very minor around the inside. And a couple of nuts and bolts on the engine look like they are starting to rust up a tiny amount. You know, I'm being very, very picky here. Like, you'd have to really look for these faults that I'm telling you. But then I do live in Cornwall, and it is very salty down here, so, you know, we do tend to struggle, you know, with rust down here. I completely coated it with that, what's the stuff, the anti-rust stuff. I put the name of it on the screen, but I completely covered it in that, preempting any issues. But obviously I didn't put any of that on the discs, and the discs are always kind of exposed. But yeah, I think if you are going to be leaving outside, there, you know, it's not super rust resistant. There are going to be certain nuts and bolts that are going to go. But overall, no major problems. Like I said, it started every single time, whether it's wet or not, no issue. So yeah, so that's a couple of things that I don't like. Like I said, long haul, you know, distance on it at speed, it just isn't very comfortable. It's really not for that, and it's quite a noisy basic engine, so that will kind of drill into you after you know, a few miles doing sort of 70-80. But so if you're buying it for that, you're probably buying the wrong kind of bike. But on these little sort of Cornish roads where you're whizzing around at sort of, you know, 40-50 and overtaking people and stuff, the engine's very urgent. It really wants to overtake. It really wants to get going and pick up and go. The exhaust note is really quite nice, so it does actually kind of it's very inducive of, you know, yanking back the accelerator. The cows are having a good old time over there. And yeah, it's a usable amount of power. Like, it's enough power that you really feel like you can pretty much overtake any car on the road without any problem. And if you pull up next to another motorbike, and as long as it's not like a super bike, you feel like you could really sort of like have fun with them, you know, following them at speed and stuff, and you wouldn't really be any kind of disadvantage, because it's really not a very heavy bike, obviously, and that is definitely one of the pluses, is that it doesn't weigh too much, and so you can manhandle it pretty easily. I haven't dropped it yet, even though I've very nearly dropped it several times on very loose footing, loose rocks on gradients. The back wheel was just kicked out, and I've just managed to catch it. So I haven't actually dropped it once yet. I haven't had to pick it up off the ground, but I've, pretty much gone right the way over onto one leg, and I've just about managed to get it back up again a few times. God, those cows are really going for it over there, having a good old orgy. This isn't rough. This is just mud here. I feel like I get a decent amount of grip with these tyres on the road, in the wet, and in the dirt and the slop. As you can tell, I went through a load of loose, sticky mud today, and yeah, it kind of feels like it digs in and gets a fair amount of grip. The suspension, it's firmer than my Honda 250L, definitely firmer than that, but there's still a decent amount of travel. I haven't monkeyed around with adjusting it yet, because I've just been, I've not had the bike that long yet, just a few months, so it feels perfectly fine. Seat height wise, I'm quite short. I'm about 5'8", 5'9", with fairly dumpy little short legs, and personally it is a tiny bit tall for me. If like the surface is loose and I put my foot down and there's like loose gravel, it does feel slightly too tall. Or if the wheel's on a bump on a curb and I try to put my foot down, I'm definitely a little bit higher than I want to be. But generally on flat ground, neutral ground, just grassy ground, good surface, it's absolutely fine. I'm kind of on tiptoe on both sides, but I don't ever feel like I need to shift my bum to reach the ground or anything, even though this exhaust on this side does kick out this panel a fair amount, which again, that is something I will say is part of one of the downsides. When you're standing, when you're going along the trails and standing, this tends to rub into the back of your leg. If you're wearing your big thick boots, you probably won't feel it, but that does tend to stick into the back of my calf a little bit. You can just shift your weight forward slightly, but it does kind of ends up pushing you a bit further forward than you would be a natural comfortable position. But I really don't think it's a deal breaker. I know a few people have commented on this panel and saying there's just no position for your leg when you're standing. I don't really think that's true. I just think you just get used to it, and as long as you're wearing knee length, up to the bottom of your knee boots, you won't feel the rubbing. But if you are like me today, I'm just wearing like walking boots, I will get a bit of a rub in the back of my leg, which can be annoying after an hour or something, and day after day after day, that would annoy you. You could obviously take this panel off, but it does kick out a fair amount of heat. That's another thing that I will say. It does seem to run quite hot. Obviously, we're experiencing a very hot summer at the moment here in England, and I'm down in Cornwall. We had record temperatures recently, so that's obviously part of the issue, and I'm generally out in the middle of the day as well. But it does kick out quite a lot of heat. I sometimes wear shorts. I know you shouldn't, but I sometimes wear shorts with it, and you really notice all the heat, just boiling off of it. Certainly more than my Honda. I've never had a overheating, light come on. It's never got so hot that it won't run properly, but it does kick out a fair amount of heat. And when the fan kicks in, it tends to blow it directly onto your leg as well. So it's a little bit hot. And if you're tootling around in first gear down very slow trails, it does feel like a big hot monster under you. It doesn't feel like it's ticking along like sweetly. It does feel like, oh, I'm getting hot. Even though it doesn't falter on you, it does feel like it's running, hotter than it ideally should do. Obviously, if you're in a hotter country than Cornwall, then that may possibly be an issue. But like I said, we are experiencing a very hot summer at the moment. Headlights, I find them to be absolutely fine. They feel quite cheap, they're just kind of plastic, but brightness wise, I actually think they're really quite good. I have no issues seeing it at night time going down completely black lanes. The high beam is really quite good. The indicators are good, no issues with those. Brakes, I think the brakes are really, really good. I've never had to yank the brakes as hard as I could. I've always, even when I've been in a slight mini emergency, I've always felt like I've got tons of stopping power. These Bybray are sort of like, they're like cheap Benbro, basically. Not that I know much about these things, but just going from what other people say. But in terms of the feel of them, the modulation and how they feel and how they actually stop you, I've got zero complaints. It really does feel like I've got more braking power than I actually need, front and back. And I do actually use the back brake quite a lot because I'm going down quite slippy slopes a lot and everything. You've got switchable ABS, but I've only ever used that like twice, to be honest with you. Let's see, what else can we say? Weak points. Well, this is some of this stuff that looks like metal is plastic, so it will scratch up quite easy. The tank is actually a wrap. It's like so this isn't metal, this is plastic. I've got a scratch there, that was from my keys rubbing against it, but it's never going to rust or anything because this is just a plastic wrap, so it seems fairly robust. I've got a bit of a nasty scratch there. Still don't know exactly how I did that, and it's just on the sticker anyway, so it's obviously not a big deal. But you know, generally speaking, this is just plastic as well. I think if I did drop it, that would just snap off quite easily, but it gives the radiator a little bit of protection. So I probably will just leave it on there. So toughness wise and you know, kind of robustness wise, I've had no issues, but then I've not dropped it yet, touch wood. I've just been, you know, usual kind of wear and tear. When I first got it, this front headlight, the whole thing was really quite wobbly, but you know, I just tightened it up and it's absolutely fine now. The mirrors, you get an okay view in the mirrors, but they do vibrate a fair amount. You know, this is it is a single pot 4-stroke 450cc, and it's not super refined, so it is a bit vibey. Certainly I think the rubber inserts into the foot pegs are beneficial. You feel it in the handlebars a little bit, not too much, less than what I thought actually. But the wing mirrors do vibrate a fair bit, so you can see a car behind you, but it just has that sort of bit of a buzz when you're at speed. So yeah, a little bit of vibration. That's the adjustment for the rear suspension. Again, I've never messed around with it, not had to. Let's see, have we covered everything? So we've talked about the engine, the power. I think plenty of power for the weight personally. Talked about the brakes. Talked about suspension briefly. Like, because I'm not going off any jumps or anything, but I am going over a lot of rough roads and very rough, uneven surfaces. So I think I'm giving the suspension a fair old workout. But you know, like I said, I'm not a pro rider, so you know, I'm just tootling along down little green lanes and bridle paths and over the odd field and stuff like that, and then lots of potholed, you know, very bad Cornish roads with lots of holes in it and stuff. And for me, for that, it's been absolutely fine. It feels cushy when it needs to be cushy, and it seems to soak up the bumps when it needs to. Possibly if you're doing massive wheelies or you're doing jumps or something, that's when you're really going to you know, test the suspension a lot more than I am. But either way, you know, it seems good to me, and it seems better than the Honda 250, which was my previous bike. It seems much more firm, and it actually seems to hold its own weight better. It does dive when you brake, like, you know, these are quite long suspension travel forks. It will dive when you brake, the same as the 250 did, but it seems to do it with a little bit more finesse, and it doesn't feel like it's bogged down by its own weight, if that makes sense. It seems quite balanced and planted. We talked about the lights. Fuel economy, definitely not as good as the Honda. I can get about sort of £8 into the tank, £8, whatever the litrage is of that, I don't know. I've never really got it right the way down to the bottom. I've always like filled it up when it gets the warning light first comes on. And sort of on a long day of riding, you know, I probably need to put petrol in once on a long day of riding. I know that's a bit vague, but I've not done any sort of you know, I've not sort of counted the miles or anything like that. Let's see, yeah, so economy, power, brakes, I think I've kind of covered everything. Like I said, the seating position is really good. I possibly would prefer the handlebars being slightly higher, so I probably will get a riser at some point just for when I'm standing a lot, and tilt the brakes down a little bit more, just so it's slightly more comfortable when I'm standing. Like I said, the only issue with the standing is this here pushing into the back of your leg a little bit. But apart from that, it feels very comfortable, and you've got a reasonable amount of ground clearance. Obviously, you've got this header here, which is going to be prone to getting hit if you go over like a tree stump or something. I've not kind of had to clear anything that high yet, so it's not been an issue for me. Just depends on how much of an off-roader you are. I'm obviously fairly sort of take it easy novice level, so you know, just take my opinion with a pinch of salt when it comes to that kind of thing. So yeah, I think I've covered everything now. I've covered the things that I don't like and what I don't think is good for. But yeah, like I said, it gets so much attention, and I just enjoy riding it. I enjoy owning it, and I enjoy riding it, and you know, that's got to stand for something, isn't it? By the way, with this luggage, it's a little bit ghetto, obviously not quite designed for this one. Just put a zip tie there in because these were slipping off, these straps here. But yeah, this is a Krieger OS system. I tend to carry tripods and cameras and drones and stuff, so I like to have a fair amount of luggage. And this is quite a cheap Givey tank bag. It's not the best, but I find the official Fantic one, which looks much nicer and screws onto there, that one doesn't fit my phone, whereas this one does fit my phone quite nicely. So if I've got my maps where I'm following my TET or you know, just a route, then I can see it much better in there with this little cheap bag. And it, you know, it does a good job of holding my gloves and wallet or camera or whatever else I want to put on there. So yeah, that's those. I don't think I'm going to be doing any other mods for quite a while. I just enjoy riding it, and I think I'll leave it there, guys. I think I've covered everything. I've no doubt I probably have forgotten something, so just chuck me over a question if you want to know anything. By the way, yeah, hasn't burned any oil at all. Like I said, I've just had the first major service, so they just changed the oil, but it didn't burn any oil while I was riding it for the first, you know, 700 miles or so, and then they did the service. And it didn't burn up any water. Everything just kept on going, no problem, no issues, started every time, like I said. Yeah, okay, I'm just repeating myself now. But anyway, guys, I just thought I'd give you a little bit of a 1,000 mile review on my Fantic, because I'm still very much enjoying it and I do recommend it. But just bear in mind, it's a little bit basic, the engine basically, and it's definitely not designed for the long haul. That would be my main two comments about it. But it is a lot of fun, and it makes you want to drive like a lunatic. It makes you want to overtake people. It makes you want to, you know, throw it into the corners. Like, it's just small and pretty light, and lots of, you know, it's eager. I think that's the word I'm looking for. It's eager to go. It really is, and it does seem to handle the off-road stuff to my level totally fine. Anyway, guys, apologies if I'm just rambling and repeating myself, but hopefully that'll be useful to anyone who's considering getting one of these. One last thing I'll say, my mate thinks it looks like a duck, and I can sort of understand what he means by that. The high mudguard and all that kind of thing does have a bit of a duck face, but a handsome duck, I would say. Yeah, that's my opinion anyway. Obviously the Scrambler version has a little mudguard down here, not the high one with the clearance. So that's slightly different looking. I think the Scrambler possibly looks slightly better than this one, but I knew that I was going to be taking it off-road, and I just wanted that extra bit of ground clearance that the Rally has, and the slightly uprated suspension, and it's also got the alloy swing arm and a couple of the little bits and bobs, like the number plate, like the headlight protector, which is possibly useful. Like I said, this is just plastic, so if a stone did get in there, it probably would smash it, so it's quite nice to have an extra bit of protection. So yeah, I'm glad that I went for the Rally, and I quite like the colours of this one as well, so aesthetically speaking. Right, I'm definitely rambling, I'm definitely repeating myself. I'll catch you guys later, and I hope that was vaguely useful. Cheers, guys.